we see other companies that have flagships. Now we've got like the standard, the Pro, the XL, the Ultra, you know, the we're gonna nickname this device after whatever super fancy sports car edition. Hello, my name is Fiona Gomo, aka Techie Supreme, your supreme source on all things tech, and today we have a special guest. We are unboxing the LG V60 ThinQ 5G. We also have the dual screen display, so we are going to dive into these guys just now and take a look at what's inside the box. But I definitely wanted to come on and chat with you guys a little bit about my thoughts on the V60. I think this device right now is a very interesting proposition. We can just take a look. Maybe we can just open a little bit and just do a preliminary look at what we've got in the box. Ta-da! I think I have the blue model, and just kind of taking a peek in the box myself, I definitely think the blue is my favorite between the two models, which are blue and white. Is it like clearly blue and clearly white? Yes, I am a fan of the blue, but we're gonna take a dive into that later. I wanted to come on and chat a little bit about my opinion on the V60. So I'm going to do a little bit more of an in-depth review in another video, but I wanted to kind of just touch base about why I personally believe that the V60 is not a flagship device. And I don't say that as a negative, I just say that kind of as a general statement and my personal observation of what's going on in the market. So I'm sure a lot of people, especially if you're into tech, if you follow LG and things like that, usually in the beginning of the year, we're used to seeing the G series as LG's flagship. And now we don't have any G series right now. It's really funny. There was actually a leak that happened the other day, and people were saying, oh, this is the G9, but it actually turned out to be like an early mock-up of the V60. So I thought that was hilarious. But like I said, usually we see LG's flagship earlier in the year, and oftentimes in previous years we've seen the V series get released later in the year, and a lot of times that's kind of like, it kind of has like a Samsung feel where it has that a little bit of a test bed for the next year's flagship. And now we don't really know what LG is doing and how, or if it's shifting its release cycles, but there's something going on there, and I'm imagining we're just gonna have to kind of wait and see, you know, what the company has planned for the rest of the year. But for me, my primary reason for saying that the LG V60 is not a flagship in terms of definition is very simple. It does not have the premium display. The V60 has a Full HD Plus display, and even though it has a lot of the other specs that are considered premium and flagship tier, like the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chip, it's got, you know, pretty good RAM, a large battery, very complicated camera system. But in my opinion, there's kind of has to be not even necessarily a whole package, but for me, I definitely think that the flagship chip and the flagship level display both need to be present in order for a device to be considered flagship. And that's kind of like that's my bottom tier definition of flagship. there's other things that I take into consideration, and just kind of thinking about this and looking at a lot of other devices that are being talked about around this time, and in terms of price. And like I said, that's kind of what I talked about in my previous video, where I was talking about the price in juxtaposition to whether or not the V60 is a flagship. LG does kind of stay, they're still a little bit more on the under $1,000 range. It definitely is right now very easy to just kind of stamp and say, well, flagship now is over $1,000. But that's, I do agree, that's not necessarily 100% true. I was writing the other day about the Pixel 5 rumors, and what's interesting about the Pixel 5 rumors is that there's a suggestion that that device may not have the flagship chip, but it may have the flagship display. But the fact that it may have a chip that is 5G powered, but it's not the 865, could potentially bring that price down. So overall, we've kind of been seeing this for a few years now. A lot of companies really kind of mix and matching specs in order to bring prices down. And over time, the definition of a flagship is slowly changing, where it used to kind of be very clear. It was like this device that was released at this time and had all of these flashy specs. And you knew exactly what the flagship was and what wasn't. And like I said, even if it was like the difference between the G series at the top of the year and the V series at the bottom of the year, there was a very clear demarcation of exactly what a flagship was. And pretty much everybody has kind of blurred those lines of a flagship definition. And I myself will be looking at what LG does in the rest of the year and beyond to see how this company in particular is redefining its flagship position, and to be quite frank, even possibly if it will redefine its flagship position. What I found pretty interesting, just kind of looking back at pricing from old models, like if you kind of just look at the other very standout devices that LG has launched in the last year, the G8X, which is pretty much a predecessor to the V60 that has the dual screen attachment, is also a device with a full HD plus display, and it was also priced a bit lower than we've even seen for the G series. The G8 itself, ironically, while there are certain carriers that have a little bit of a cheaper price, a lot of the carriers sold that device for $840, which again is cheaper than the V60. And on top of that, what I noted was that the G8 and the V50 both have QHD plus displays. So that's kind of the big difference between LG's devices, earlier devices last year, and what we have now. We've got these two devices that were priced higher, that have all of the flagship markers, and last year. But again, there is that sense of give and take. And like I said, the big question right now is why. But my answer is this isn't, I don't know if I want to say this isn't a flagship or if this isn't the flagship, if you know what I mean. Other things that I wanted to point out about this device are just little things that I noticed, like we only have one RAM and storage model, and and again, especially with devices that are considered flagship, premium, you're going to have those tiers. There's going to be those options for whoever wants whatever, you know, whatever storage, you know, if you need your extra storage and things like that. And I know we have micro SD expansion, but that's not the point now, is it? And another thing about just kind of the market in general is that I also feel really notes that this is not necessarily a flagship, is the fact that this is, again, kind of the only model. And by that I mean we see other companies that have flagships. Now we've got like the standard, the Pro, the XL, the Ultra, you know, the we're gonna nickname this device after whatever super fancy sports car edition. And this is the LG V60, and that's it. There is no other model that goes along with it. There is no other series. So again, like now that's kind of how the industry itself has morphed, where it's not just the flagship device, it's the flagship series. And so again, that's what I am kind of looking at when I say that this is not necessarily, again, like I said, either a flagship or the flagship, where there could be a lot more room for LG to step back and kind of really showcase something much with a lot more pomp and circumstance. Another thing that I would point out, which is a little bit, again, like I said, there's such a gray area in terms of what's going on in the market as a whole, but also with the V60 in having the accessory, which we're not going to get into the fact that this is a sold separately accessory. We're not going to get into that right now. For most carriers, it depends on the carrier. What I'm getting at is just kind of the idea of the V60 having this kind of niche proposition where, for all intents and purposes, this device is not intended to stand alone. It's intended to sell with its accessory, and that's the full capacity of its use. Like, obviously, you know, like, users can do what they want. If you want to buy the device by itself, you can, but that's not the full intent of this device. The full use capacity is that it is used with the dual screen attachment, where the dual screen and we talked about that in the other video, that this attachment is specific to this device, and that may not be so in the future, but for now that's what this model has going for it. So like I said, it is kind of very niche, and then thinking about this, it kind of reminds me, again, even when you think about how the V series used to be a later year, I used to release later in the year, it reminds me again of kind of like the Note series, where I remember back in the day when I used to write about when I wrote about the Note series, I would always call it like the late year flagship. But again, it was always kind of like that caveat. And again, those are things that a lot of people may not necessarily focus on in terms of what you call a flagship, where there are certain devices that get called flagships that, again, there's like a little bit of a check. It's not just flagship full stop. There, like I said, if the Note, for example, is a late year flagship, where Samsung's S series is just flagship, and and that device in particular is also a niche, where it has this S Pen, and again, there's this whole idea of it's not just the device, it's the accessory that goes along with it. And then the other series that I was thinking about in terms of the caveats is OnePlus, where now we're kind of seeing how OnePlus is changing and morphing, and even that is still kind of an incomplete story. But back in the day, we had this affordable flagship or flagship killer type marketing. But again, there was this caveat. It wasn't just flagship full stop. And OnePlus did something very similar where it had the flagship chip and it had a ton of the flagship specs. But they did things like you would have the lower level display. You didn't have other features that are now considered flagship standard, like water resistance and wireless charging and things like that. And that's still, pretty apparent in newer devices. But even now, OnePlus has kind of gotten to this point where you have the different tiers, and it's not necessarily spoken out loud, but there is this kind of unspoken rule that, for example, if you take the 7 series, I'm going to use the 7 series more so than the 7T because I think it's a little easier, it's a little clearer with the 7. The 7 specs is very similar. Like, you have the flagship chip, but it doesn't have the flagship display, and that device doesn't have the reach that the other models have. And then there was the 7 Pro, and that was, again, that has the flagship chip, that has the flagship display, and it has the flagship reach. It's available in, and that is kind of the device that OnePlus really wanted people to see. And then, like I said, you've got your vroom model that's like, oh, here's our fancy thing that we can do. And like I said, I feel like and if you kind of want to compare that to LG, like I said, we kind of haven't really seen that from LG at all. I feel like last year with the G series and the V series getting launched at the same time, where the G series was the flagship and the V series was showcasing 5G, that was kind of their preliminary attempt at having the different tiers and having, the different things to showcase. But there is likely some sort of, like I said, whatever is going on at the back end of LG, that will likely take some time to really become apparent to us as the enthusiasts and the consumers and things like that. So that is kind of just what I had to say about that is what I had to say about the LG V60 in terms of a flagship. By no means did I intend to say that it's not a premium tier device, because it definitely is. It's got the price tag. This is still a pretty penny for this device. But like I said, just kind of following devices and following the industry, I can be a stickler about what I refer to as what. And like I said, I personally think that this is not necessarily the flagship, because I think LG has something else up their sleeve that will be the flagship. And like this, again, this is kind of a special niche device that, again, the accessory and the features that are on this device are very cool for what it is, but it's not like the razzle dazzle that will really kind of be thrust forward as this is our absolute top of the line for 2020. Okay, so now we are going to take a look at the LG V60. So like I said, we have the classy blue model. So this is the device itself. I can wait. So obviously LG wants our safety and driving safety. So this is the model. Like I said, we've got some gold trimming on the frame. We've got our headphone jack, heaven, and USB-C. Like I said, full HD plus display, not QHD or QHD plus, which is right now at least the more traditional flagship level display. We've got some micro SD expansion and our SIM as well. We've got power button, volume rockers, and a Google Voice. So, ta-da! We've also got a teardrop camera, selfie camera in the back. We've got an AT&T model. In the back, we've got the triple lens. I'm personally calling it a triple lens, even though a lot of people do not necessarily refer to the time of flight sensor as an actual lens, but I'm still using triple lens for my description. And for refreshing of the memory, we have a 6.8-inch display. Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chip with X55 5G modem, 8 gigs of RAM, and 128 gigs of internal storage. Like I said, our triple camera is a 64 megapixel main camera and a 35 megapixel camera and a time of flight sensor. And the front camera is a 10 megapixel camera. And so those are the most basic specs. We're also obviously running Android 10. Oh, this way. So, actually, maybe we will just do a little bit of a setup. Oh, actually, let's open the other one, the dual screen. So like I said, I'm definitely gonna do a comparison with the G8X, which I also still have. Luckily, that one's also an AT&T model, so we should be able to do a pretty close comparison. The accessory also has a 6.8-inch display. What I will say, this, well, I don't know, it's got a little bit of weight to it. And I'm like, I was just thinking about that now, just kind of putting it in as a whole. It's not like super uncomfortable, but it definitely has a little bit of weight to it. Once you get it, I feel like I'm like touching this side, and then it just really, again, it's not like super heavy, but there's a little bit of weight. So select now how you want your screen to look. Hey guys, check it out. We've got some 5G action there. It's not 5GE either. Yeah, so not a lot of 5G action, but 5G action nonetheless. So this is skip. This is the attachment, so you can, if you are plugging in or charging and connecting, it goes right here, and then you can plug in your, we can actually just check in what else is in there, which is really just the cord and charger. So like I said, we've got a WSB, and you just plug that in, so that adapter just goes like that. So back to setup. Sure. And no thanks, not right now. Skip anyway. So this is a pretty interesting, I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I think in our long-term review, we'll discuss this. Oh, geez, come on, what the hell? Wow. Okay, so if you're buying this device, especially the AT&T model, I actually did, some of my buddies that have already set up their models, they were like, yeah, they had to take how much ever time to, do we want to install any of this? Might as well. So some of my buddies were saying that they spent a significant amount of time uninstalling the AT&T bloatware in particular. So let's see. So what I wanted to show you guys was, yeah, so this is the turning on the dual screen. Okay. Well, actually, no. Huh. Well, I guess you can see it. Now just kind of seeing it in person. It's really interesting because when I saw it in the picture, you can see it, but it's not bothersome. I don't know. It's not really that bothersome. It's literally pretty much what my friend was saying was this home row is a little bit lower than this home row, but it's not by much. So like I said, you can see it. I'm not saying you can't see it. I'm just saying it's not that, you know, again, it's not something where you like sit there. I mean, unless you're just kind of like a stickler like that. I'm sure there are people who are like, oh my God, that would bother them a lot. But personally, that's not really something that would bother me. And like I said, when I did my hands-on before the launch, that's definitely not something that I even noticed. But in my friend's photo, I noticed it. It seemed really prominent, but kind of seeing it now, it really doesn't seem that prominent. So you guys can let me know what you think about that home row. Pretty much this one, ooh, what's going on? Pretty much that these icons are a little bit higher than these. So this is some of the features that are used with the wide view. So you can kind of turn these guys on and you can kind of turn those guys on. And if you want to use the wide view, let's try. There's just things like installing like mad while we are playing around. Let's try YouTube real quick. So that is use the dual screen on main and wide view. So that brings the device on both. Now, what is interesting is, I think, again, and obviously these settings, you know, you can change them how you want, but for example, this can kind of work a little bit better in terms of having like the screen on top and then maybe like comments and things like that on the bottom. So the other one that was pretty good in terms of Google, in terms of using the wide view, is potentially maps. Where you can have, I don't know, let's see, where can we go? That's interesting. Where can we go? Let's go to King's Plaza. So you can kind of, it's interesting because you can kind of, the moving around is pretty easy. And you can kind of get, now that's the thing about it. That's the thing about this device that's really interesting. And I personally will be very interested to see, because right now, at least, this is LG's iteration of a foldable. But how are we feeling about the fact that it is not continuous when we do see other companies having something that's a continuous display? And I think, like I said, I think that in other form factors, like I said, other things that we can show, I don't really, other things that are pretty, let's say if it is something like, you have maps up on one screen and you've got Facebook up on the other and things like that. So in terms of multitasking, and with the G8X, I definitely did use it for things like that, where, I used it very well for productivity. And it was really interesting because it was kind of like a grand scheme where I was able to live stream on one screen and tweet on the other, and then have my computer where I was writing stories. So kind of as somebody who's like, a tech reporter, that, again, the broad scheme of it. And I think that is even just the idea of like people who are just kind of like heavy power users of tech as a whole. That's kind of what the dual display is really aiming at, where it is just kind of like that second screen that you didn't necessarily know you needed, but it's there when you do. So the front has all of my fingerprints, but we also do have we do have a little bit of a there we go. We do have a little bit of a notification display on the front, which is also pretty cool. Like I said, overall, like I said, the thing about it is like I feel like it feels like it should be heavier, but it's not, and that's kind of like a good thing. Sometimes when you handle it, it kind of feels, and again, that is kind of like a little bit, when it's a little bit more open, there is a difference between kind of holding it this way, holding it kind of focused this way, and holding the device itself, where you can feel the difference. If you need a kickstand, you have a kickstand. Again, able to prop the hinge up as needed. And LG did talk about how they have upgraded the hinge so that it is a lot easier to maneuver. And again, it, like I said, however it stays, however you need it, all the way around, even back to front. So I would love to know what you guys thought about that now that we have unboxed. Is anybody interested in purchasing this device? It is now available, and like I said, the handset is $799 and the accessory is $199. It is currently available on AT&T and T-Mobile, and I believe AT&T has a deal where it's like you get the accessory free, but T-Mobile doesn't. And then later on we have US Cellular and Verizon offering the device, and Verizon in particular, they have a little bit of a higher price. I believe their price is like $850 or so, but the biggest difference is that Verizon has support for not only sub-6 5G, but also their own millimeter wave 5G, while the other models are sub-6 only. I'd love to know your thoughts on this device. I'd love to know your thoughts on my opinion. Do you think that this device would still be considered a flagship even with the things that I've explained? I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, bye.